In this video, I'm going to simplify the concept of React hooks, what they are and why they are even important in React applications. In the previous video I made on my channel, I talked about React component state and lifecycle, and I used class components to describe what it means. And you can check out that video, but as a summary of it, it's every component have states and they have a life cycle. And this is the state of this dog component here, and you can also update that state when this function is called. And this component also have life cycle methods, such as when the component is giving birth to, with component did mount, you can run some code here. When a component grows and the state changes or the props changes, this lifecycle method component did update is called, and you can also run some code here. And when a component dies, when a component unmounts, you have component will unmount, and you can execute some code here before that component is unmounted from the DOM. All of these things are applicable with class components, but how do you also apply them in functional components? I'm going to try something here. So I'm going to just copy this and I'm going to comment all of this. And then here I'm going to have function dog and it returns this. Now in this functional component, I cannot have a state object. I cannot do constant state, and even if I do some things in this state, later on if I update this state, the component would not be re-rendered because that is not how to define a state. I'm just defining an object variable. So how do I also manage state for this functional component, and how do I also have access to this fancy lifecycle methods in functional components? Now this is where React hooks come in. So React hooks allows you to hook into a component state and life cycle. And without React hooks, this was only possible in class components, which you can see here. But with functional components, to have access to all of these things, this is where you need React hooks. There are so many React hooks. I'm going to show you some of them. There is use state, there is use effects, there is use callback, use context, use this. There are so many of them, and this can be used for different purposes. But in this video, I'm going to focus on the two common ones which you would find in almost every React application, which is use state and use effects. Let's start from use state. Use state, as you may already guess, use state allows you to hook into the component state so that you can also, declare a state like this in the class components, and you can also update the state later on. How do you use this? So you have an array here, and you call the use state method or use state hook, and in this bracket you can pass a default value. I'm going to just copy this, and I'm going to paste it here. And this is the default state: age 6, temperature, cold, hairy, true, hobbies, jumping, smiling. And this array here, I can destructure it and have two names for it. So the first one is the default state, which I can just call condition, and the second one is the set state method, which I can call set condition. So you can name this however you want. You can even call this state and then have this as set state, or you can even call this status, and here you have set status. This is the default, which is status, and I can do this by console log status. Okay, I have some errors here, and that's because I am using this. So I'm going to remove this dot because we're no longer in a class component, and I'm going to use status because up here I call this status. So when I come back here and refresh, you can see the state age 6, hairy, true, hobbies this, and temperature of cold. To update this state, I can have a function here. I can also use it the way I had it in this function, this class component. So I'm just going to have a function here, updates temperature, which takes a temp, and it calls set status, and it's going to spread the previous status, and we're just going to update the temperature to temp. And right here in this button, I can add the function here, which would be update temperature, and I'm going to pass hot. When I go back to the UI and I refresh, you can see I am a dog code, and this is coming from here. I am a dog and the status.temperature. Now when I click on the update temperature, you can see this becomes hot. So the temperature state becomes hot. Using the use state hook, I've been able to assess the component state and also the set state method, just as we have with class components. Now, how do you hook into a component lifecycle? This is where you use the use effect. Now, use effect has this declaration, or it has this syntax. You pass a callback function and you also pass a dependency array. And the dependency array is a list of values that this use effect depends on to rerun this function. When you pass an empty dependency array, this is the same thing as writing component did mount. So here I can say console log I am new here. And when you go back to the UI and you refresh, you can see I am new here. This is component did mount. Now, how about component did update? For component did update, you can pass a dependency that this use effect will depend on. So I can pass a dependency like status dot temperature. So when the temperature state changes, this use effect is going to be called. So here I can say console log temperature state changed. So when I come here, you can see it says temperature state change because this is also run when the component is mounted. And when I click on update temperature, you can see this function is run, this use effect is run again because the state has changed. Then how do we interpret component will on mount? You return a function from the use effect hook. Whatever function you return from the use effect hook will be run when the component is about to be unmounted from the DOM. So here I can say so sad to leave. In the app component here, I have this unmount dog state, and I have this unmount dog function, which when called updates the unmount dog state to true. When the unmount dog state is true, I unmount the dog component. When I click on unmount, you see the component is unmounted, and this function that we passed to the end of the use effect hook is called so sad to leave. So the concept of React hooks is to allow you to hook into the component state and lifecycle, like I stated earlier. And this was only possible in class components before. You only had access to these things in class components before. So React hooks gives functional components access to those component features. If you found this video helpful, kindly like it, kindly subscribe, and also share with others.